Welcome to the Massive Change Show. I'm Justin Foster.
And I'm Dr. Virginia Lacayo. In each episode, we have conversation with leaders who are getting in some good trouble by challenging paradigms and shaking the system.
And after each conversation, the episode shifts to the second show, where Virginia and I chat about what we learned from the guest.
If you know of any leaders who will make a great guest, please introduce us.
And of course, if you enjoy the show, please like, share, and leave a review.
Thanks for listening.
In this episode of the Massive Change Show, we're joined by Shakti Dudley and Alan Prushan, the founders of the Enlightening Leaders Journey, a community for organizational leaders committed to leveraging the power of their position and consciousness to transform the world. Enjoy the show. It's two of our favorite people, Alan and Shakti. Both of you are at our wedding. We're pretty transparent that we're, couple, or we're partners in all the ways. And also just in transparency, you're clients of ours. And it's always a fun experience to talk to people where you really, really know them, but also you have some inside baseball on what they're building. So welcome, Alan. Welcome, Shakti.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you both.
Yeah, well, it's really nice to have you here. Should we let them, invite them to introduce themselves?
Yeah, we're just going to go there. We're just going to give it a little pause. So before we dig into our system shaker questions, I would love to do kind of a reversal introduction. So Shakti, you introduce Alan of 2 or 3 things that the world should know about Alan. Alan, you introduce Shakti. And then we'll start the system shaker questions.
Great.
Wonderful. So Alan is my business partner, and Alan is also a coaching client of mine of many, many years on his spiritual journey. And what is so extraordinary and impressive about Alan, first and foremost, is his devotion as a father, as a husband, as a brother, as a friend, as a coach. He is extraordinarily devoted and committed to the people in his life, including people he's never met. So what to know about Alan is when you meet him for the first time, he will make an impact with you, whether you asked for it or not. The other extraordinary thing about Alan is his worldview about everything. So he looks at leadership, he looks at everything that's going on from a much higher perspective worldview and brings a wealth of knowledge.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Shakti. That was very kind. So, as Shakti said, I'm a client of hers. We met working at an international consulting firm together. And there's a lot of things I could say about Shakti, but first and foremost is the level of grace and calm that Shakti brings to the world. It's a rare thing. You don't see it often. And when it shows up, it stands out like a beacon of light, which is another description of Shakti, which is she's a beacon of light for everyone that she touches, regardless of whether she was a client of yours or not, or just the yoga instructor at the yoga studio that she attends. And then she is a master in the distinctions of ontology, which is a branch of metaphysics and philosophy. And she brings that masterful way and that grace in her ability to coach and help reveal for people the parts of themselves that have been hidden to them before they met her and were no longer hidden after they've met and spoken with her. So, and she just does it with a level of grace and gentle touch that maybe that's why we're business partners, because we're the yin and the yang in that perspective.
Yeah. And so the two of you have joined together to create something called the Enlightening Leaders Journey. And this is a project that we've been working on with you for the last couple of years. And we'll have the show in the show notes. You can go to the link. But in essence, it is a community of business leaders who are on a path towards higher consciousness, and that can be a lonely place to be in business. And it's interesting in its symbiotic relationship with what we do with massive change. Is you two are providing a lot of the inner work, and so when they're ready to create change in the world using their business, then they're sort of set up to come to us. So it's this beautiful flow of a spiritual conspiracy to make the business world more conscious. So you can learn, everyone listening can learn more about Enlightening Leaders Journey in the show notes.
Okay. Well, again, welcome. It's really delightful to have people that are real system shakers and that are working at the roots of the problems and not just at the superficial level. So we're excited to have you here. Let's start with the questions that we ask to all system shakers that come to this show. The first one is, what is the big idea you have that will probably piss off a lot of powerful people?
Well, it's certainly not our intention to piss anybody off, but if that's what's needed to make the change, then so be it.
Usually.
So for decades, we have been working individually and in the last 4 years together on really bridging the gap between leaders' spirituality and their leadership. So we're raising the consciousness of oneness in leadership and bridging the gap of our spirituality. So they are one and the same. And no longer will leaders need to divide themselves between the two. That's bottom line what we're up to.
Yeah. And I think I would add to that is, I grew up in the corporate world, and there's things they talk about in the corporate world. You shouldn't talk about religion. You shouldn't talk about politics. And there's, what we call this structure of leadership following in power. That's the traditional paradigm, right? And the traditional paradigm of leadership is that while we all have spirit, right, and a soul, is that we're divided and can't show that aspect of ourselves in our leadership. And what Shakti's pointing to for us is this idea is that that's a false reality. We are all one and we are our spirit, we are our leadership. They don't exist independent of each other. But unfortunately, the traditional paradigm suggests that you have to keep them separate. And that's the oneness that Shakti's pointing to. And we're saying, no, that's a false reality. And that it's just a bankrupt model that doesn't work in the world anymore.
And it actually causes harm. That bankrupt model of separation is what's causing harm in our world. And the way to deconstruct that is to remember who you are.
So what makes that dangerous to powerful people?
Well, if you are reporting to a board of directors and you are focused solely on profitability and growing your company, it could very much interrupt the way you do business if you begin to look at the people of your organization as their soul. The soul of the people and the soul of the organization is what's going to have everybody thrive, particularly their customers and all of the people involved in the world that are impacted by whatever that company is selling or producing, so that there's a true difference-making focus. And that focus on the soul of the company and the soul of the people, making a true difference in the world, is what elevate their company and ultimately have them make money.
Yeah, and I would add to that the employees today, younger people today, are committed and interested in working for organizations that have a meaningful purpose. They want to work for something meaningful, not just to make money. And if the focus of the organization is just to make money, if I have to do a job and get paid, I'll do that. But ultimately, they're going to leave to go find some place that provides meaning to them and makes a difference in the world. And those organizations that can align themselves or demonstrate that they have something that they're working on bigger than themselves, which is more than just the profit of the business, that they will attract and retain a higher level of talent that will differentiate themselves in the marketplace for their customers and ultimately the bottom line of the business.
And too, Justin, I think the other thing that could have people get ruffled by this notion is that a lot of executives and leaders have spent their entire careers crafting and putting together like the perfect winning formula to be a leader. And our work comes in and interrupts that and has them really challenge and question to the heart of the matter if the way that they're presenting themselves in the world is true and authentic to their soul. It is great, no problem. Right. But for most of the people Alan and I are interacting with, there's a divide there.
Sure. Yeah, we see it too. So before we go to the second standard system shaker question, I just feel in my heart to ask you this one, so I'm going to do it, is because this is a debate that I have with people a lot out there, especially on Substack, is do you believe that consciousness and capitalism can be compatible?
I do.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Without question. So nowhere in our philosophy, methodology, do we ostracize capitalism. Capitalism plays an important role in our society. And all we're suggesting is that the irony of it is that when you're able to raise consciousness, bring consciousness into the world of capitalism, you're actually going to be better off than not having it present, right? And I always love to tell the story about Herb Kelleher, because I have this philosophy that founders are fundamentally different than professional CEOs who grow up and become CEOs. And if you think about it, what Shakti was pointing to, this winning formula is designed to help us survive and make it in the world. So if I'm raised as a professional, in the business world, my commitment in that winning formula is designed for me to survive and make it in that world, right? And to get to maybe the CEO role. Whereas a founder, that's not their commitment. Their commitment is for their business to survive, not for them to survive and make it, right? Completely different paradigm. And so Herb Kelleher used to share, the founder and CEO of Southwest Airlines, he used to say that I'll take care of my employees and my employees will take care of my customers and my customers will take care of my bottom line. That's not the way the traditional CEO thinks, right? And during his time at Southwest, aside from the phenomenal growth that they were a benchmark of how organizations should operate and function in one of the most difficult industries to make a living, the airline industry, because there's so many variables that are outside of their control. And that's what's possible, quite frankly.
And I think the other, I just looked up capitalism. I love using ChatGPT this way, And if you read the definition, which I won't, but if you read the definition, it is black and white. It's cut and dry.
Yeah.
And that would need to be elevated to a higher vibration of consciousness of how we are using our money and our goods of service. And is it really in the highest and best good for all concerned? Or is it solely focused on me, myself, and I making money? And if that's the sole, if what this definition is what the true meaning of capitalism is, and there's no hope to elevate it, then it's a bankrupt paradigm and we need to reinvent it completely.
Yeah.
All right.
That'll probably piss off a lot of people.
And talking about one of the challenges that you mentioned before, that many people don't read, leaders that have been working in the industry, in their company for many years, might not even know what it means to raise their consciousness. And that
Right.
might be scary. It's like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to go through therapy. Like I don't feel like facing my demons and getting this skeletons out of the closet or anything like that. So I know it's very complex. It's a complex work and it can be uncomfortable. I will not say painful, but uncomfortable sometimes because you have to, you know, unlearn a lot of things. But can you give us just a brief description of what it takes for a leader to raise their consciousness? I mean, what kind of things they have to work on?
Sure. First and foremost, it takes an enormous amount of courage to face your authenticity and your inauthenticity. And you cannot lead today. I don't care who you are, how much money you have. We could name names that are pretty famous in the news right now, but we won't. And it is obvious to everyone who's watching where authenticity and inauthenticity exists. And that's because everybody's looking through their human mind opinion of what they're seeing, but they're also looking through the window of their soul to what they know is right and true and in the highest and best for all concerned. And if leaders today, executives today, have not done that kind of looking, they are more than likely coming to the end of the road of what has gotten them to where they are. Because you can only go so far in this lifetime without something from your higher self forcing you, boxing you in to wake up. And one way or another, our higher selves will get us to wake up, either through tragedy or through love and consciousness and awareness. So this is not just Alan and I are calling leaders to account here. This calling is coming from a higher order. We're listening to the nature of our own higher selves, but we're also being called. It's almost like you could say Spirit called Alan and I on the phone and said, I want you to wake leaders up. And we heard the call. Not to be right, not from our ego, but from a knowingness that there is something happening on our planet, and every one of us are privileged to be alive at this time. Because this is the greatest awakening that humanity has ever been confronted with. And we're the pioneers of this new paradigm, all of us. So every leader that's listening or hasn't listened yet has the opportunity to join in and be a new paradigm pioneer of a new possibility for leadership and spirituality to lead us into a new world.
Very powerful. Anything to add to that, Alan, before we go to the next question?
It's so funny. I've got a reputation with my wife of being able to pick out good movies, and I picked out one last night and we watched it, and I knew nothing about it, called Jerry and Marge Go Large.
Oh yeah, I love that
It's
movie.
based on a true story of a guy who retired, was very strong in math, and figured out a loophole in the lottery system in his state. And they didn't have a lot of money. They never did the lottery, and he was afraid to tell his wife. And she was so looking forward to reconnecting with her husband after retirement. She's like, yeah, let's go do this lottery. And then after the first time they came back making with these big winnings, she stopped him in the town, the poor town in Michigan, and said, well, maybe what there is for you to do is help everyone in the town, not just you. And so he basically created a corporation so that he could raise money and they could share the proceeds of the winnings. But the real truth of this, why I share the story, is one other person figured out the loophole, which was a young man at Harvard University. And he ended up figuring out who this other guy was, this retired guy. And he ultimately threatened the guy that, all these college students would destroy these people's lives. And he got initially upset, and then he drove to Harvard and he said to the guy, what I realized through this process is I'm not angry with you. I've learned to connect with people because of this. And what I'm doing is helping everyone in my town. What you're doing is helping yourself. And all these people in this room are getting nothing for it. And then in the end, the kid's life fell apart. All the young students abandoned him, and all his townspeople lifted him up in the end. And that ultimately is kind of what we're pointing to, is that the old model of just making money is no longer just good enough. We got to help others and make society better somehow. Right. And it's a poignant little story for that.
Yeah, it's a great example. Good timing. That's a great movie. You'd love it too, Virginia, if you haven't seen it, because it really is it's very good. Basically about consciousness and complexity science. So I know you think I think everything's about complexity science now, but that kind of is. Anyway, so setting this next question up, because we live in this incredible time in the sense of this awakening that happens, but there's always that, it's always the darkest before dawn type of thing. And we live in a country that is now experiencing, many of the people that live here, including citizens, are experiencing at least some elements of sort of the enemy of consciousness, which is what we think authoritarianism is. It's a type of kind of anti-consciousness. So in the lens of the current world that we're in, and this response, this sort of dark energy coming out of a particular political party and brand, what are the biggest obstacles that you're running into or challenges when you're out talking about these ideas that you have? What are the kind of resistance are you getting from other business leaders?
Well, when I don't really experience resistance from business leaders, Justin, I think the biggest obstacle for Alan and I is getting out there and speaking to people. You can put us in front of anybody, and I have 100% confidence in the conversations we would have with people. It's getting in front of the right people. That's the biggest obstacle, I think. I don't know, Alan, what do you think?
Yeah, so what I would add to that is our approach is not to evangelize this idea of people becoming spiritual. And so what Shakti's pointing to is we want to tap into the people that have already they're on their own spiritual path. They have their own level of awakening. They're exploring this notion of, yes, can my spirit and my leadership coexist? They're already on the path. So, our biggest challenge, you could say, is we don't have Oprah's brand. Like if we had Oprah's brand, right, people would just listen to us, right? So we're not known, like I'm using her as an extreme example because she's so well known, right? But we don't have a brand that just attracts attention because our message resonates. It's the brand that's, we don't have that big brand. Yeah.
So that's a really good point. Let me rephrase it. Let me rephrase the question then. What are the obstacles that enlightening leaders face in their businesses or their industries? I think of a project that you guys are working on together now, and they're in an industry that isn't necessarily known for being very conscious. They are, but the industry isn't. What kind of shit are they dealing with when they start to live this way?
Yeah, I'll take the lead on that if you don't mind, Shakti.
Not at all.
I think it starts, and Shakti said it very early on. She said, what's needed is courage. right? So you need to have a leader that has a high degree of courage. I would add conviction. And the common thread, I think, is they have a healthy dissatisfaction with the way things are in their business. Now that shows up differently in every organization, right? I mean, the CEO that we're referring to, first of all, he's had coaches throughout his life. You know, I was not his first coach. And what it points to is somebody who's like, well, I'm pretty good at what I'm doing, but I could always get better, right? So he's willing to have people impact his life, all right? But he's at the stage of his life where he could sell his business, but he doesn't want to. But he doesn't want to run his business either. He wants to, you know, create this self-sustaining organization that allows him to benefit from the fruits of the labor of the organization, but he's deeply, deeply committed to the community in which he lives and works, and the people that work in his organization, many of which are immigrants in his country because it's a Canadian company, and that's what drives him. The reason we got hired is because he wants to own the business, not run the business. And he recognizes that he needed help to be able to make that a reality. Okay. So you need courage, you need conviction, and you need a healthy discontent with the way things are, whatever that may be. His is just one example of many.
And what I would add to that is the wisdom that you know you need a coach to step into the gap between where you are in your current circumstances and your own vision for your own future. And you know there's a gap there. And there is no sports athlete, professional or collegiate, in the world that would not have a coach. And it's just time for leaders to wake up and own that.
Yeah, I agree. And the question I wanted to ask you, that is a little bit of follow up on what you said at the beginning, Shakti, is that it happened with us too, that we are in front of an audience, almost any audience, and they are 100% in agreement to our vision and to the ideas that we present. Everybody's like, yeah, that's the way it should be. Like everybody should be that way and everybody should work that way. And, you know, like they agree with the concepts and the theories, but there is a gap between agreeing and totally approve that and actually even recommend it and, you know, to other people, talk about it. And the decision that takes courage and wisdom, as you said, but that decision of behavioral change, saying like, I'm going to invest on this because I want to do the change. I need help to do that change, because I know a lot of people that says like, yes, systemic leadership, for instance, that is one of the things that we support with, or, you know, systemic consciousness, you know, that kind of understanding the system in a different way. Either people don't know what we're talking about, but when we explain it, they go like, oh, yeah, of course, I've been working on that. And some of them actually go to the point that say, I'm working on that, meaning I start working on that, I'm raising my consciousness, I'm going to get there by myself. You know, I don't need help. I'm reading a lot. I'm reading a lot of books. So that is something that I perceive that happens with leaders, especially the ones that are successful. That have that level of success already. It's like, I got here by myself. I can move forward, you know, without help.
Well, that's, if I could, before you answer the question, that's the first level of ignorance. Nobody ever gets there by themselves.
It's true.
And if they believe that, then they are not actually, they don't understand what they're even talking about.
Can you say that to them?
Well,
yes, you can. And I'll give you an example. Okay. I had a prospect, very first conversation, who said to me, I feel like my VP of operations is stealing money from me. Not literally, but because he's not delivering on what I need him to do. And I said, okay. And then he, promoted, he went to West Point. He's really smart. He's da. I said, great. I asked him one simple question. How long has he been with you? He said 9 years. Now, by the way, when he was telling me how great he was telling me, I'm not sure if he's a keeper. And the next thing after he said 9 years, Virginia, out of my mouth was, well, if you're not sure he's a keeper, then you're the problem, not him. Okay. And then I proceeded to tell him how it could play out. And 3 weeks later, he called me and said, I did it. I fired him. And then what could he do but hire me?
Yeah.
Right. But I have to, that's who I am. It's what I pointed to earlier, the yin and the yang between Shakti and I. Yeah, I have to have the courage to be able to speak my truth.
And Virginia, to Alan's point, when someone interacts with you that way, what they're demonstrating is ego.
And fear.
They're being their ego. And a lot of leaders and executives today lead from ego.
Yeah.
And this is exactly why we're creating the Enlightening Leaders Journey. Because oftentimes in these kinds of conversations, you got to start the work immediately. You don't wait for them to commit to doing the work. You say, may I offer you something? And they say yes. And you say, your interaction with me right now is coming from your ego. I'm asking you to look at your soul. Do you know the difference? Let's have a conversation about the difference between your higher self and your human self. And that took 30 seconds for me to say that to you, Virginia. But you have that kind of interaction with someone in your meetings, and there they are. They're caught right in it. And that's our job. We're here to awaken people. So we got to push them right into their own resistance, lovingly, respectfully, with dignity, but not tolerate it, because they are literally full of you know what. And they're full of themselves, and they can't get out of their own way. And this is exactly why they need to hire the four of us, is to awaken from that consciousness that has gotten them just this far. But if they really tell the truth, I promise you there are areas they are suffering.
Right.
And you got to get authentic about your own inauthenticity in order to raise consciousness and become your enlightened self. It is work. You got to roll up your sleeves, and you got to be willing to dive into the morass of nonsense that you have fooled yourself and your world with. Because we cannot continue to build a world based on all that goo. I'm saying that instead of the four-letter word.
You can say it. This is fine. Yeah.
Great.
Do you get what I'm saying, Virginia?
Totally. Absolutely.
Like, I encourage you to step into your own divine feminine power and call them out.
Oh, I do. I was just, yeah, I do. I mean, it's just like Justin knows that I have no filter, that how do you say, Justin, that I'm the master at?
Oh yeah, she's the evisceration, and this is rated R profanity, but it's our show, so we're going to say it. Virginia is the master, and Alan, you're kind of like this too, the master at the subtle fuck you. So,
but not you, but to because up.
Right. What I have found is that the ego, especially in men, does not open gently. And that sometimes you just basically have to, the crack where the light gets in, oh, dang, I totally spaced on the singer that said that. He's the one that did Hallelujah.
Oh.
What's his name?
I know.
We'll edit that.
Yeah. I can't think of his name, but I know who you're talking about.
Oh
the Hawaiian.
Leonard Cohen. Okay. Yeah. Leonard Cohen. So anyway, we'll edit this part out. So it's that directness is the thing that Leonard Cohen said, everyone has a crack where the light gets in, paraphrasing. Sometimes the cracking is coming from a coach or somebody that's willing to be direct. And, my favorite brander of all time, Jesus, that's what he did, So we want to wrap here soon. Virginia, you want to go ahead and ask the
Yeah.
the final system shaker question, then I'll
But
wrap us up
just
and
yeah,
off we
just
go.
want I
Yeah.
just want to, but Jesus, if you really, really know the story of Jesus, Jesus the man,
Mm-hmm.
he took himself to account. He held himself to account.
Right.
He
To the
went
same
in,
standard that he was using. Yeah.
he knew he needed to deal with his own demons and
Right.
his own fears. And he
Right.
went into the forest to pray, to be alone, so he could confront his own humanity, which then
Right.
gave him strength to come out and hold other people to account.
Right. And it doesn't, what I've learned the hard way is it does not work to fight someone's ego with your ego.
No,
But it's also important, and I think it's important for people to hear this that are in the business world and they are conscious people, is consciousness has teeth. It has an edge. It does have a blade. It's not a pillow fight. And that's where the courage comes back into it. Anyway,
yeah,
back to you, Virginia.
not
One,
woo
one,
woo.
one more thing I want to add. Did you want to finish, Shakti? Go ahead.
It's not woo woo.
Yeah.
No.
So back to where we were, Virginia. There's a question that I frequently use, and you're seeing the gentleness that I was pointing to of how Shakti can interrupt someone's thinking. But the question I always like to share is, are you open to another possibility? So no matter what they say, you use the example of, oh, I got there by myself, or I've gotten here by myself. I'd call bullshit on it. Maybe you would too. Maybe you shouldn't. I don't know. But I would say, are you open to another possibility? It's what I call a cause for pause question. It forces people to stop and think, wait, am I open to another possibility? Right? And if they say, first of all, I've had people say no, which I appreciate. And then obviously I can't do anything with that. And then if they say yes, then it's say, well, first of all, I'd like you to consider that you didn't get to where you are by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, well, what do you mean? Well, okay, who helped you along the way? How'd you get here?
Who work with you?
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that starts to reveal or create an awareness around something they were unaware of before you had the conversation. And what Shakti also said too, is somebody asked me about how do we sell? We don't sell. We just deliver services in conversations.
Right.
Which provide coaching, alter people's worldview, alter how people are seeing whatever they're confronted with. And then some people step in and some people don't.
Yeah.
Attraction.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for me and for everybody listening too, because we are kind of the community attracts each other, right?
100%.
Yeah. Okay, so the last question is, what are the measurable impact you would like to see with your ideas, with this idea, this project?
Measurable.
Observable.
Observable.
Yes.
People in leaders and executives falling in love with themselves and demonstrating their own being in love with who they are with everyone they come in contact with. That they then elevate the leadership of the entire organization, because everybody, right down to the janitor, is a leader in their life. And everybody can be impacted by the depth of being seen, being known, being heard, being gotten for their own unique gifts, skills, and talents. That's what I would like to see.
Mm-hmm.
There's a word we use in business, excuse me, to inspire. And if you deconstruct the word inspire, it means to breathe life into. And as leaders, our job is to inspire others. Certainly inspire the vision and purpose for the company. But the best way to do that is to inspire the people that you lead, to help them to see themselves in a higher light than they already see themselves. And that is, I know for me and I know for Shakti, the greatest gift you can give to another human being is to help them elevate themselves. Yeah. Now, another one of my favorite movies is Pay It Forward. Imagine if every leader in the world was committed to elevating everyone that they led and interacted with. What would be the impact on the world?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
So this is a rich, deep topic. We could talk for days about it, but I want to wrap with just a reaction from both of you. A couple of words, just like rapid fire things, is how would a listener know that they need to know you? Like they're looking at themselves, and other than intuition, how would they know that they should get to know you and what you're doing, and maybe become part of the Enlightening Leaders journey? What are some indicators? And
well, the first word I would use is resonance. So they resonate with the message and the conversation that we've been having. And if it resonates, then the obvious thing is, wow, I want to be with these people. Whatever that looks like, I don't know, but I want to be with these people.
Beautiful. Shakti?
I would ask them to look authentically to answer the question, are you leading from your human self or your higher self? And do you know the difference between the two?
Okay. Well, we're going to do this transition into the second show and say goodbye to you two for now. Thank you so much for your directness, your generosity of spirit, and sharing your ideas. And I'll see you when we're not being recorded.
Thank you both for having us.
Lovely
You're
to
welcome.
be with both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so what do you think?
Well, I have somewhat of the curse of knowledge with Alan and Shakti because I've worked with them for so long. Alan was a client of mine way back. I think he's been a client of mine since 2016. And then this project we've been working on with them for the last couple of years with Enlightening Leaders Journey. Mm-hmm. But I'm struck again by the timing and the cost of separation. And so I guess I was like doing some triangulation of the resistance to, for example, the resistance or scorn for DEI is in direct correlation to level of consciousness, which has everything to do with benefiting from a system that relies on some level of extraction. And so if that's a triangle, let's just call it ego, DEI, and extraction, then I can understand, not justify, of course, but I can understand that how terrifying that would be to realize that triangle is going away. And what struck me also is a conscious business would produce in its own way a much more, a much greater meritocracy. Not perfect, but certainly a much greater meritocracy than a traditional stockholder value, shareholder value type paradigm that so many businesses in, and there's that spirit of separation. And what I think is interesting too, just from almost like a theological standpoint for myself as a Christian, is when they're talking about these separate lives, the actual definition of sin is separateness, separate from. And so there's this like separateness from people, and that it's easy to exploit them, easier because you ask the question to some people, how do you sleep at night? Because they're like, how does that not bother you? And it's because within themselves, they're separate. And anyway, so I'm just struck again by the timing of what they're doing and how when we had them on before, but the recording didn't work, and how different this was like a year ago. Yeah. And how different the world is now, and how much more important it is to hear what they're having to say now when we got our own, Prince of Darkness type shit that we're dealing with than we had back then. So those are my initial reactions. I have other thoughts, but what about you? What struck home? What struck you? What stuck with
Yeah,
you?
well, I took a few notes. Let me check. Um, I think that what resonates a lot with me and my approach to leadership and system change, a lot of the spiritual work that and language that they were using, that resonates with complexity science as well, like the concept of oneness, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
that in their case they were talking about, the leader, the leadership, and that persona with their spiritual one is really one. And the fictional separation that we have between, work and home, and the business and the personal, and the leadership and the spirituality is really fake. Is fake. Is not real. The reality is we're only one person. We are this, but
Right.
also we are part and an intrinsic part of the whole system. And everything we do or we don't do is going to be affected by, and is going to affect everything else. And to understand that for a leader, it makes a big difference. It's really a big difference in the way they lead and the way they impact the system. Their system, calling their organization, but also their industry, their communities, the whole country. So that's one thing. The other thing is they mentioned something that we've been talking to when we talk about, becoming indomable, the program that we have for mindset coaching, that has a lot of that authenticity and
Mm-hmm.
courage and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. When we talk about and system shakers as well, when we talk about system shakers and we invite companies and leaders to become a system shaker, we mentioned several times what the statistics says about millennials and Gen Zers in particular, looking for really paying attention, not to what you say, but what you do as a leader and as a company and as the leader of a company, and being able to detect the, bullshit, and detect all the greenwashing, and all the fake pro-diversity
Mm-hmm.
speeches and things like that. And they care. And the market is not just your employees, but the market that is very young right now are deciding what products are going to buy or not buy based on what they think about the leadership and the company. And they
Mm-hmm.
care about leaders that are conscious, socially conscious, that are system shakers, that are bold, that stand up for the causes that they believe in. I mean, those things matter right now in the market, not just to
Mm-hmm.
retain employees, but also to retain and customers and grow your market. And let me think, because I mean, they're so good. They were so good in sharing their thoughts. Um, I understand the challenge. What they say, I think, is a challenge that we face as well. That leaders that are conscious enough to look for improving their level of consciousness and improving the skills as system shakers and as systemic leaders, when they have to report to a highly conservative board, that they only understand and care, especially if they're, mostly by all people, they understand and care only about the traditional leadership style, the all power style. That is a conflict that might threat leaders to pursue this approach, or feel that there is a threat. I don't agree if necessarily it's a threat. I don't think you have to report your personal journey with your board.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, once you raise that level of consciousness where your decisions and your vision and the way you understand things is not manufactured, but actually
Right.
comes out of the wisdom that you develop, you find ways to
Right.
improve your skill of leaders, leadership skills and also the way your organizational model works without necessarily getting into conflict with
Right.
what the board needs and wants. Is really
Right.
be clear about what we both want and how I can meet them halfway or even invite them, get them persuade how this is a better way.
Yeah. Well, I think a big challenge for this thinking, and this applies to what Shakti and Alan are doing, what we're doing, what Massimo is doing, some other clients, is that if the CEO is an employee
Mhm.
and not the founder, then their motivation is very different in reporting to a board and reporting to shareholders. To a large extent, authoritarianism relies on apathy in the marketplace, because authoritarianism without the apathy buffer gets its ass kicked in the marketplace.
Yeah.
You look at My Pillow and what happened to his brand with his affiliation with authoritarianism. You look at what's happening with Tesla now, and I don't think anyone, I'm never going to be promoted of vandalism, but the over indexing of how horrible they're saying it is that Teslas are being vandalized and it's terrorism and things like that. But the cognitive dissonance to not see actual acts of terrorism against people, especially from marginalized communities, whether it's, anyway, I could go on and on about that. But my main point to that is authoritarianism needs apathy in order for the shareholder value model to work. And that's why I think you're going to continue to see that your more enlightened or more higher conscious leaders are going to be founders, or they're privately, they own their own shares, or it's within a small group of shareholders. And that means that the sort of the speed of application is much higher too. Like if a business leader or an owner, if a business owner had a level of consciousness that said that they were going to give away X number amount of their profits to a foundation or to any nonprofit, she or he don't have to run that through a board. They can just do it. And so what I'm intrigued by is that the market for those of us that are in the space of consciousness is rarely going to be a publicly traded company for all the reasons that I said. Mm-hmm. And yes, they have the greatest reach and the greatest impact and the most resources frequently, but they're not anywhere near ready to live like this, to embody this, in my opinion.
Yeah, maybe. I have hopes,
yeah.
But
yeah, I have less hope about that. But the hope I have is like the project that Alan and Shakti are talking about on the podcast, this company in Canada. I've got some insight on what's happening there. This is not a small company. It's a large company, and in a space, in the healthcare space, which is not necessarily known for being all that enlightened sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's the encouraging part to me, that there are more leaders than there used to be in this space, but they're probably going to be founders.
Yeah. And then some big companies are hiring, and usually, and still at a very low and slow rate, women. They're hiring women in the CEO position, and they are system shakers. When a woman gets to be a CEO of a large traditional,
mm-hmm.
the company that has lived for, exists for many decades, and suddenly she's the first woman CEO, that
Mm-hmm.
changed the game a lot, and they're usually more conscious. So
that's a great point. Yeah, that's a really good point. Women and CEOs from traditionally marginalized communities tend to be more open to these kind of things, but the implementation has its own restrictions because of the systems that they're in with, shareholders and boards and things like that. So anyway, my favorite thing about this topic is, to me, this is the right in the crease of the past and the future. And Shakti said, we live in the most amazing time, and it's also like, what the fuck is happening? But it's also like this other side of it too, of like being there when the Age of Enlightenment started to happen, or the Gutenberg printer was invented, or things like that. Like it's both terrifying and exciting. So
Yeah, it's not, I don't think we can say that it has started yet, but is close to start a new human renaissance in some ways. I
yeah,
mean, really open up to a completely different way of leading, living, buying,
right.
consuming, everything.
So I have a question for you that came up during this, that when you ask them about impact, is just taking, let's say, the U.S. Do you have a sense, seeing this through the lens of complexity science and systemic, seeing it systemically, how many founders would need to be considered enlightened leaders in order for there to be kind of the what Gladwell called the tipping point? Do you have a sense of like what that looks like?
I I need to know how many funders are in the country, and honestly, I don't have that data.
Okay,
Um,
fair enough.
After that, even because it's a complex adaptive system society,
Mm-hmm.
the whole society, there are many factors in place. I mean, you can have, right now we have a huge majority of citizens, like habitants, residents in the United States that are pro more progressive policies. And
Mm-hmm.
even though the huge majority is pro, I don't know, abortion, for instance, in certain circumstances, at least,
Mm-hmm.
we still have very restrictive laws. So
Mm-hmm.
to change a system, numbers could or could not matter.
Mm.
Influence of the people, having that different vision is what really matters. Is how
Yeah,
the capacity of the few to influence the system, not
right. It's
the agreement of the majority.
right. That's a really interesting point, because it goes back to something that you talked about in your keynote on shaking the system, of that it was corporate pressure that led to the passing of the law that codified the right to marry whoever you want, and that came from corporate pressure. And it goes back to something I've said too, is like uh, there are factors in place like gerrymandering and voter suppression, and those two are the big things, where the the political system is not reflective of the sentiment of the country,
Yeah.
but one of the overriding factors that changes that is when the business, as the President Coolidge says, the business of America is business. So when the overriding pressure on the system, on the political system, is to change, and that comes from business, I think that's when you're going to see the shift, because to your point, it's not going to be majorities per se, of voting majorities that are going to change gerrymandering or change voter suppression, because it's very strategic, very surgical in very particular red state areas,
Yeah.
or purple state areas. But if business pressure is coming down, it kind of supersedes or transcends any sort of political system. Because at the end of the day, in the United States, the economic system will override the political system.
Yes.
It just in its nature. Yeah.
That can be, but and the problem now is, unfortunately, the most important capital right now are supporting that kind of policies and supporting the government. And we're talking about businessmen that are extremely influential
Right.
because they have the means of information
Yes.
and
Right.
important industries. So it's hard to overcome their influence easily.
Mm-hmm.
But if we sum all the other industries and all the other
Mm-hmm.
business, even within that industry, and they get organized enough
Mm-hmm.
to really target and be very strategic about the things that they want to support and they're going to be against, then
Mm-hmm.
it's powerful enough.
Oh,
So
man.
again, it's not the quantity, it's the quality
Yes.
of the influence.
Right. Great. That's a great starting point, a stopping point. Goodness. I like that on the second show, I just take a bunch of notes too. Like, it's just great. You're so inspiring.
Thank
Um,
you.
all right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. As we always say, if you like what you heard, or even if you don't like what you heard, please leave a comment, please share. Note that we do have a new landing page for the Massive Change Show that allows you to submit a guest. And so that link will be in the show notes. And we have other recordings coming up with some amazing people talking about everything under the sun, from women, white women in DEI, to systems weavers, to many more to come. So with that, say have a good day.
Good day.